Earth to board, earth to board.
Certificates, but he's in the middle of the room when he does it.
Hello.
So can you pull them back?
It's time, it's time that we get back focused on what we're doing. I hope you had an enjoyable, restful lunch.
I tried.
Here's a proposal for where we could go from here. Chris and I have worked through lunch to try to get a very much working draft of what we heard you say. If you would be willing to do so and move forward, this is what we're recommending. If you look, and notice we call these goal areas because we have yet to wordsmith them appropriately, but what we would have is a learning goal, team number one, a learning goal that would be something like ensure that all students in Indiana learn through participation in the educational system characterized by accessibility of educational opportunity, achievement of educational goals, accountability for system outcomes. That gives you accessibility, achievement, accountability frame, okay? And you would link under that what you think is appropriate. Under 2, human capital goal, provide the highest quality human resource possible to teach and lead our K-12 schools. All the objectives under that one would deal with everything you had already articulated very well, which deals with PD, it deals with licensure, it deals with recruiting and managing of personnel and human capital, and not only for teachers, but for leaders at all levels. Now, the stakeholder goal would be to increase the involvement and support of all Indiana stakeholders in the process of education, and we could add some things there. I didn't wordsmith the language about it, building up a culture of excellence, but the idea there being, though, the more we build a stakeholder team at the LEA level and at the state level, then you have better chances for higher student achievement and all that kind of things we were talking about. So it would be that. If these big buckets would work for you now, what we're suggesting is we let Chris go ahead and do the teaching part on what should an objective be, what should be in an objective. Then what we're recommending is that we would let you all voice the fact that who would like to work, at least for this afternoon, on goal area 1. Who would have a passion in this group to work on goal area 2? Who might have a passion in this group to work on goal area 3? Now, the only way that won't work is if all 8 people decide they want to work on 1, in which case you would have to give us the flexibility of picking 4. You know, but we'd like to have some of your interests, because if you have an interest in an area and a passion for it, we don't want you to be working, you know, in another. What that means is that when we come back to the committee work, which will happen in February, we would then have your thinking that we could take back to the committee as a starting point in the 3 areas. Is that an acceptable process for the afternoon? Has anybody got major heartburn that this, now what we would be saying with this is, once you get into it, like if you all get into number 1, and you start digging into it, and you dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, and you dig it and to the point where you say, man, just listing the objectives for number 1 is overwhelming. We recommend you subdivide it, or you do this, or you rename it this way. That would be all in your wheelhouse as well. In other words, it's a dynamic process. Is that okay? Do I hear a support of that we can go forward with this plan this way?
Yes.
Anybody? Okay? Up? Yes? Okay. This is what we're going to do. Chris is now going to come, and he's...
About the groupings first.
Oh.
Who would be interested
Okay.
in working on?
Stakeholder goal number 3. Anybody raise your hand? 1, 2, 3. All right, you 3. Your stakeholder goal. Okay? Good.
4 there.
Oh, my bad. I missed 1.
4 had raised their hand.
4. Okay.
Let's not assign them yet.
Let's just see.
Data first, okay.
All right.
Human capital, who would be interested in human capital?
Human capital. 1, 2, 3. 3.
Okay.
Okay?
They seem to be different people.
Different people, yes.
Number 3, which is a good.
We wanted the afternoon off.
You okay? Not an option, not an option. All right, we had one member that just... We had one member that just joined us, so we don't want to leave him out. He gets to pick.
It looks like that at work.
All right. Gordon, you get to pick. because you're a wild card because every other group is balanced, 3-3-3, I think, so pretty much.
So what are we picking?
You're picking which one you want to work on this afternoon to develop objectives. You're right,
Two?
two. So we'll have a group, two groups of 4 and one of 3. That'll work.
To reshuffle.
Okay.
The reason that we're doing this, Chris should understand, that's what it's probably. All right,
We will not be divided.
no, you don't necessarily need to move yet. One of the things that we had on the agenda was the piece about stakeholder engagement as a strategic goal. And my plan there was to do 2 things, essentially. I wanted to attempt to model this process from top to bottom so that you get a sense of how an entire sweep of a goal is, and to try and make the point of exactly what an objective is. That was the point of the teaching moment, was to really get you guys to center in on really what we're looking for when we make an objective. My suggestion would be that we table all the content piece of that, and I just concentrate on the objective setting part right now and get you all to work as fast as possible. Since we have 3 goals, we have 3 teams, and we aren't in a position where we have to select, 3 of 5 goals to work on. I think we're at a much better place, actually, right now than we would have been if we'd had the 5 goals. So I'm very happy with what happened, and I hope you guys, don't find any issues with this setup. So let me just talk to you quickly about objective setting, and I'm just going to give you about a 5-minute introduction. But it's important to understand that, A, the difference between objectives and goals above them, and the difference between objectives and strategies underneath that, because those are the 2 layers that bind or that bound the objectives. And I think the best way that I've found to explain to people how to think about setting objectives, and the key to it is sort of this first question here, because you really don't want to be in the strategy level right now. You're trying to set desired outcomes that are measurable, ultimately, is what you're trying to do. So the question that I suggest people to ask themselves when they start this process is, given this goal that we're going to work on, what can we list as the tangible benefits that, will come from working on that goal? The reason that you do this is you have to, at this point, make a transition. After you hit the objectives, you're going to make a transition from what's to hows. You're going to make a transition from desired outcomes to strategies. Basically, in some ways, the objectives will tell you where the rubber is going to hit the road, and the strategies talk about the impact, the point of impact. So what you're trying to do now is to set up essentially the conditions of success. You're going to define the conditions of success in terms of tangible benefits for pursuing this strategic goal. Does that make sense to everybody? I mean, I'm really going through this at a fast rate, but you all are brighter than most. Okay. Again, measurement. This is where we start to measure. We don't measure goals, but this is where we start to measure here. So there's always this measurable question: how are we going to measure this? And then the fact is that you're going to have to prioritize these, because you're going to come up with a large list of things that you want to get done in order to move that goal forward. And at that point, you're going to be facing resource limitations, practical limitations. And so there's another important part of this, is to understand what are the things that are absolutely crucial. What things do we pick to work on? Because we can't boil the ocean. We can only work on certain things. So you need to make a determination of what's most strategic, which things are foundational, which things that you need to get out of the way. What Covey calls the big rocks in the field, you move those first. All right, and essentially an objective then is going to call for a specified change in these most important tangible benefits within a certain period of time. So that's the general structure of an objective statement. Obviously, you can take it directions, but essentially it's those 3 things. We're going to change something. Obviously, it's going to be one of the important things that we're going to change. Change it in a certain direction. We want graduation rate to go up, we want dropouts to go down, so you get the idea of the actual slope of the line depends on really what we're talking about. And then we're going to bound it in time. This concept of SMART, which you hear a lot about, is tied to the objectives in our balanced scorecard structure. SMART, or people have said, well, you're from Massachusetts, you don't sound like it. Okay, these are SMART objectives, all right?
Sounds fine to me.
But the point here being that we want to talk about specific. That's why that tangible benefits piece comes out. We talk about those tangible benefits. That brings you to a specific level. Measurable, okay, if they're tangible, measurable benefits, we've got that piece. Attainable, this is important. At this point in time, you're setting the agenda for your work going forward. You don't want to set things that you can't accomplish. I'm not saying that you want to be timid in the goals that you set, but you want to be realistic. That's what attainable is all about. Results-oriented, in our particular context, means what are these specific measurable expectations? It's tied specifically to the expectation that you're working on, or the tangible benefit you're working on. And you're going to define a specific measurable expectation. We're going to get this twice as good in 2 years, and time-bound gives us the sort of the length of time that we're talking about. So those are really the pieces that are important to do. Again, we talked with the committee about my principle of parsimony, which says that, you know, the number of things that you try and do, the larger that number gets, the less chance you are of accomplishing any of them. And that's why you want to choose the 3 or 4 most crucial objectives to work on. It doesn't mean that they're the only objectives on your strategic plan, but the biggest mistake that people can make in strategic planning is to list 100 excellent objectives and try and accomplish them all at the same time. It simply is, it's disabling. Your organization can't do that. So it's very important to have this idea of prioritization, and that sort of work. So, yes, sir.
That just sort of brought to mind, what is the time frame we're looking at for the strategic plan? Are we talking about a 5-year plan, 10-year plan, 20-year plan?
Timeline for, all right, well,
The time frame of the strategic plan we're working
I
on?
understand what you're saying. Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. You're not asking me what the time frame of when we're going to be done with
No,
our
no.
work necessarily. I would advocate that there is no limit to it. Because what I'm saying to you is that this is a process that organizations need to use to be successful. The process of effective strategic planning, implementation, and management, which is an ongoing thing, is crucial to a high-performing organization. So we're not saying that we're making a plan for the next X number of years. We're making a plan that is a living, breathing plan. So what you're going to do is review this thing annually or quarterly, depending on how your organization decides to do this. And it's going to change incrementally over time. So you're really not putting a boundary on the end result, when are we done. Having said that, obviously you are binding things to a certain extent, objectives in terms of your time frame. That is one place where you're putting down a schedule. In terms of, I don't know if it helps you, sometimes I say to people, goals are things that have a 5 to 10 year sweep to them, although your goals are going to be good forever, I think. Objectives, you know, you're really probably looking at the next couple of years and you're defining objectives. But this process should carry on as long as, if you accept that it's a valuable process to help you clarify the things you want to do, find those things, and implement, measure it, then it becomes a part of the way work gets done. The document itself doesn't last all that long. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but, you know, just because of the nature of this board, we're all in here for fixed periods and people rotate on and off.
Yeah.
That this is something that probably needs to be engaged in probably more often than not. And
Absolutely.
I mean, we're pretty much what we come up today has a shelf life of our terms on the board.
It is
if
indeed.
that long.
Yeah.
You know.
There's a question of, So in other words, we'll have to rough it in a touch, and then we'll go back
Yeah,
to get in the attainable range, or if we want to be in
exactly.
the
Well,
top 10% of all states math scores. Top half by then.
Sure. Yeah, so there's two aspects to attainability. First of all, is the idea reasonable? Do you have control? Decide that, you want to change some sort of legislation, do you have control over that legislation? I'm not sure. You have control over certain things you don't have control over. That's one area of attainable. And the other area you point out is, what is your goal? If you want to say 100% graduation rate by tomorrow, that's an unattainable goal. There's nothing wrong with the concept. It's just that the time frame and the slope is unreasonable. So there's sort of two conceptual.
Establish a baseline. Measure based on what you find.
Oh, yes,
Okay.
yeah, I just probably pointed out the obvious, but the
Just
time frame and what the present data tells us, and do some further research, say, what are some of the
Couple of terms. Let me just run through this in 1 minute. I had set up a potential example of a sample stakeholder communication objective, given what we now have as goal number 5. Thinking through the process, clearly there are some material things that can come from stakeholder engagement. So one of the objectives that I suggested was to increase these material contributions, measurable material contributions. 100% over the next 2 years. Now, that's a stretch goal, sure. But let me just walk through the pieces of this so you have a sense. The specific part, in other words, material contributions are specific. The measurable piece, we need to measure all of these individual things about how to measure them. Now, in balanced scorecard terms, those are really going to be your lagging indicators, numbers that are connected to your objectives. So technically, that's what a lagging indicator will be on your balanced scorecard. Data, the current value of those data. And you're right, Dan, that's a research job. Once you've established these numbers, then it's a matter of going out and seeing if you can collect the baseline. What is the baseline now? Your next question of whether it's attainable, I talked about a little bit. Results-oriented, we're going to set what's known as a target. So that's the other piece of lagging indicators and leading indicators as well in terms of a goal setting. Is we have a baseline, then we're going to set a target for it, and bound it over the next 2 years. Those are sort of the piece parts of this, and how they relate to some of the terminology. So I think, yeah.
For example might be, we'll develop one, but how do we measure, because until we get parents more involved, a lot of these goals will not.
Well,
How
I
do
hear.
how do we start measuring that in parent? But in other words, we wouldn't know what attainable level we want, but we know we want an instrument. You want to be a accredited school, you have to annually or semi. We could even recommend.
We've actually done that. We've actually done that. That's not a big, very good. Objective level, you're simply saying,
Get it
objective level, we're going to require every district to annually survey their parents and their internal audience or whatever using, that's your objective. 100% is going to do this each year. And when you get to the strategy level, which is going to be the next one down, you bring in some staff people. You can bring in some DOE people, maybe some other people that are experts in this. They're going to recommend to the folks, here are the 5 best research-based parent surveys, and that gets into strategy level. And there are some options there to do, but the objective doesn't change. Does that make sense? So you don't have to define that in the objective, that'll come in the strategy piece. Does that make sense?
So let's rearrange. That, see, which team had 3? Figure it
I
out.
think it's ours. I think we had 3.
Goal 1?
Goal 1 has, who's
We were
goal
3.
1?
We were going 3. Well, we're goal 3, I think, right? We're goal 3, and 2 of us are already here.
The goals as currently structured are on the board.
Come on over.
I just knew you would choose human capital. I know. Did you see my tweet?
I favorited it already. I can't believe it. I'm waiting a day.
Ooh, it's awful bright over here.
Not like last December.
Dang.
More than heard. Influential.
That and best and the brightest, that goes perfectly with our group.
Really brighter here now.
I knew I recognized you from somewhere.
Probably talking
She said it got brighter when you left. I don't know what that.
So I've been trying to think.
last December.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, where I'm not facing the lights.
Great job of rearranging yourselves. Speaks for your flexibility.
Desk creep. Desk creep.
All right, now in your,
My desk is on the floor. I'll even take my name.
in the packages that we brought you, excuse me, in the packages we brought,
Start out, it's all clean, it's all.
I have to clean out pretty frequently.
okay, I've given you guys 30 seconds to get to know your new groups. So let's try and get on task. In your packages, you will find 3 activities that are now largely, well, the first stuff on the first page is now a little bit irrelevant. But in any case, they're the objective setting activities. We're in different teams now, and we're working largely on different goals, so don't worry about that part of it. But what there is on those sheets is the set of questions that I put down. So that you can use that sheet at least to structure your conversation about the specific goal that you're working on. Any one of those 3 activities you could use. Yeah, it's all the same.
What would go under human capital?
Back one, just note down which goal you're working on. Yeah, the questions are all the same. So you can still use the activity structure, but the teams are different and the goals are different.
we on?
It's an issue with finding time and resources to put in a good system of professional development. This should
No.
but we certainly have barriers to overcome to make it be right.
I also thought underneath there was the mentoring piece, where the teacher mentor mentee program has to be under this piece as we train the new people that come into our profession.
That's another area that's no longer in existence for funding, and I know in the REPA that's being proposed, talking about a 5-year license and not a 2, and the part's not part of it. So, you know, that would, things to keep in mind, that there is no funding for mentoring, but it's a vitally important piece for our new teachers. But who could provide that? Does it have to be the school corporations? You know, out of the box, so to speak, you know, higher education institutions. Also get in your first year of teaching. Look at very unique ways to provide that mentoring. But I agree, it's very important.
I almost feel it would be helpful to go to the beginning of the process. So prior to professional development, prior to mentoring, how do we attract the best and the brightest to want to go into teaching, whether they're coming out of an ed school or a traditional Bachelor of Arts program or Bachelor of Science program in their subject area? Is there a way we can build incentives so that 10% of the top 10% of a high school graduating class, explores and considers going into teaching? How do we get the top 10% instead of the top, instead of that tier that we're getting right now? So, I mean, start with attracting best and brightest, I think, when they're in high school. So, isn't that the first piece of it? Attract, I mean, how do you?
And also having an actual program where kids can experience the art of teaching in the high school. I actually did that. I took cadet teaching at my high school, and I was in the classroom for a semester, 2 days a week, and said, this is what I want to do. So, we can have, programs like that too as part of the, pathway, so to speak, to be that. But you're also right, attracting the best and the brightest should be at the forefront.
And there've got to be inducements, probably financial, but there've got to be some inducements. Financial, but not extremely costly. Some of those programs, if you become a teacher, will forgive your loan. I mean, attract the best and brightest using a variety of incentives.
So talking about, too, we're talking a little bit about accreditation and licensing, but, it's not necessarily someone coming out and it's their first position. It can be somebody who later in life wants to devote themselves to, public service, teaching, et cetera.
Inducements for career changers,
Right.
too.
So, somebody who's been an entrepreneur, who wants to teach business and entrepreneurship, been in the arts, and wants to have a second career teaching the arts. How do we attract those kind of new human capital to profession of teaching?
How do we get native speakers?
Yeah, you may have someone coming out of the armed services who has spent 10 or 20 years learning a broad range of languages, and now they want to helping others, I got you. Well, that was the talent issue.
second career.
Second career. I mean, you see, that's the goal. You're setting the objective now. You're setting the goal. How are you going to get that done? What do you want to have accomplished?
Well, and there's an accountability phase to this as
That's all
well.
I'm saying. I didn't mean to interrupt, but.
No, we were into the
Get too much down into the
So that gets back
strategies.
to the parsimony. So three, we're looking for three statements. No more than three.
Yeah, no more, well, but that's when, yeah, but right now you've got, it's,
Evaluation.
Include is evaluation. We were just trying to get what the topics were in
You
my
were,
eyes
you were,
to get,
but I
and
heard
then,
y'all I heard y'all dipping real quickly down into the process.
Yeah.
Which is okay, y'all just keep talking. Sorry to interrupt.
No, no.
is there anything, you got accreditation, teacher evaluation, you got enticement, as I would say, or
would just say
recruitment,
recruitment.
recruitment,
Development.
and
That- Yeah.
And I think-
mentoring.
now, all those things are included into this piece.
What about for administrators? Probably some overlap, but is there anything in addition?
All under this.
Yeah,
We're
evaluation.
we're still,
Recruitment's the ones that you said?
as an administrator, I'm gonna be honest with you, you're heavily involved in all of those, and if you're not participating in professional development and recruitment,
Also applies to administrators. We
yes,
have to attract and
right,
good administrators and have professional
exactly.
development for them and
Right. I was just thinking, is there any other?
Because I think you could put the teacher. You
So,
agree?
so there's, okay, and, but, at what, okay, the board has no happening at the ed school, right? So there's no, is there any role connected with, out of that?
talk about pre-service.
Do you consider ed school pre-service? Is that how?
Yeah, that's what we call pre-service training.
Oversight of the ed schools.
We have oversight of
The
accreditation.
required
Accreditation for the
coursework.
programming for pre-service
Gotcha,
teachers.
gotcha. What do we do first? Do we talk about
What do we have?
tangible
So we're
benefits?
looking, so we've got our goal, we're looking at.
Thinking,
So are we identifying the benefits of this goal?
Yes.
Benefits, okay. Benefits. Well, the benefits are higher student achievement because studies show effective teachers have students with higher achievement. Okay, so a more diverse workforce, more reflective of the student population? Is that what you're saying? What's the benefit of that?
Practical experience. Or practicing, those type of teachers are practicing and bringing life experience to the classroom, because classroom otherwise, and if they can't see how they're going to use it or where they're going to use it.
Has to be measurable. So the first benefit is more effective teachers, and the second benefit is higher student achievement. More effective teachers and administrators.
Improving your administrator.
Love of learning. Data shows it's the number one thing you can do to improve student achievement. Put a highly effective teacher in the front of the classroom. Better than taking them out of a economic situation and giving them a high socioeconomic situation. Just give them a great teacher for a couple of years running, right?
Don't we have? I thought we were already started to develop that collection piece.
31st.
How do we know, what if you have a French teacher? How are they
that's not-
determining if she's highly effective or he? I understand how we're determining effectiveness of teachers. French teacher. Okay,
I mean,
okay.
it's everybody.
And is that at the building level?
And it's,
Okay,
and,
okay.
and,
At the corporate level.
and private schools aren't involved.
Well, other benefits. Done with benefits? Because it seems to me that if this, everything that goal area 1 is doing will be a lot easier.
I wouldn't want to say, okay, what's 2018?
Essentially, you're saying, bus drivers and the, fall under,
Part of our goal. So, well, I don't know that we need to, or we licensing and I'll be with you in a moment. So,
I'm not saying it needs to be changed.
oh, I need such and such, I get that kind of advocacy to go do it. So I was searching for that, but also wanting to work. Required to test the classroom every week. That's not what a national board certified teacher. not about inquiring about that. So you can be a really great teacher, but sometimes the system that you work within doesn't allow classroom, the system, so that we can have these great teachers. And I'll go even be some. Not allowed that, very base pieces come out. So to me, this is all about allow it and embrace it and trust it. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have better learning. I don't know how better to say that. For me, that allows that and trust. It's been a long
That very reason,
You know
no
what?
doubt.
There's a reason for
Yeah.
that. I truly.
At a grade level. An A to F doesn't typically apply to them.
And how to have that kind of. Started to stifle.
I agree. Want to attract the best and the brightest. We're,
No, we are.
Okay.
I know we are. Trouble getting
Yes.
to an objective.
yes. So attract, you're not going to attract,
Hold
if
on,
one
you
of the
could increase
objectives.
the recruitment of teachers to the profession by what percent?
And we can actually track whether
You can track.
their grade point equivalents from actually track whether we're attracting brighter students. We can do
And so that's got to
That
be
we
the
can
goal.
do.
That's
That we can do.
that's a measurable, important goal, but we're not going to be able to attract them if we don't say you're going to have some autonomy in the classroom, and all you're going to do is write objectives on the board and test every time you turn around. Right.
maybe there's another objective is that we have encouraging
So-
the best practices of classroom instruction and free.
We
I don't know how to
know,
measure
I
it.
mean, I know you're very big on national board certification. That's one means to an end. And recruiting the retired Eli Lilly chemist is another means to the same end, if the end is innovative, effective classroom instruction.
By whatever means.
Attract people who already know their stuff. Okay. All right, so he started to get on one. I mean,
I think you need to increase the recruitment of teacher with high academic status each by a certain percent. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. That you're starting to increase the recruitment process. Because what I'm saying is, you're not decreasing the other. The other thing is we have is the evaluation piece. Increase the number of teachers that are highly effective.
okay, so that's an obvious, easy goal.
It's an easy thing.
The percentage of highly effective teachers. Highly effective administrators too?
Yes.
Yes, highly effective teachers and administrators.
Yeah. And the thing is, that's already through your corporation's evaluation process. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter which level you're on. Does that make sense? It doesn't matter if you're in RISE or you're in some other system, TAP or anything else. They all have that same three categories.
Gotcha. Okay.
So then we can track that.
Yeah.
So I think that needs to be on there, but I think the increasing by a certain percent of your new recruits will help us.
Increase recruitment and retention of, what do you call that? What do you call those A-plus, cream of the crop people? And Glenda just said we can track that. We can go back and look at their high school scores.
Yeah,
Call that. Increase recruitment and retention
all right.
of highest achieving. It is 137.
I have just all. I have just, I'm just.
So we need to come up with some, we have our categories, but we don't have any.
Recruitment and retention is highest performing.
Okay, good. Let me ask you this, are we supposed to do something with this, the four of us, outside of this meeting?
I don't know if that's our homework,
And if so, well, I guess there's only four
or are
of
they
us, so
wanting us
it's
to
not a
do this?
quorum.
Are we supposed to have it now? I'll begin on time, I'm coming after you guys.
Parent
Our survey
involvement,
goal.
parent involvement will increase X number of percent.
But again, we have to put it back on the school. Well, that was my question too, because if we're coming up with only a set number of objectives, do we want it?
Don't think you could do both?
His discussion, or does he want these
Yeah.
components like they showed on? Right.
Yeah. I would list every thought that we have and then come back and nail it down. Harvey? and-
Gotta look.
I'm a rule follower, I want to know what we're.
Our question is, these are gonna come back to the group as a whole, correct? Because we don't want to eliminate, we're like, let's put that everyday idea that we have.
Do you want them to match
Or do you want it to be
these
that
things
precise?
now, or do you want the overall ideas?
Before it goes to press, it's gonna have to meet muster there.
Right.
So, but you put down to take it to a certain point, and if there's something missing, like it's not measurable or it's not time-bound, we're gonna push the committee to add that concept.
The committee as a
Then it's
whole,
gonna- No, the committee on the 6th, when we
Yes.
meet. And then that product is gonna come back to the whole group, just like your other work did, so eventually, ultimately, we'll hold ourselves
I want to know if you want if you expected that to be done for our ideas right now.
what you can do. I mean, you know,
Thank you.
You can't carry all this water.
Okay.
Right. Schools will But when we're, and that's a good question too, because art, because there's, you know what I mean? Do we have to be careful that we don't blur the line between the focus? Right. Packets home with, you know, a book and an activity, and here's something. Involving the family unit in the act of literacy learning.
Why don't we try and wrap up these conversations?
This purpose we have to stay.
Yeah, I agree, because I think, and I agree, you,
I think
somebody
most
has
teachers
to,
are gonna look at
somebody
it
has
as-
to see as, okay, you're doing this, what's the result of doing this? You get 100% showing up, are you getting bang for your buck, and are their reading levels, are they closer to grade level, are they on grade level? But I don't know. See, I
Or maybe we
envision
keep it
this
as
at
a
elementary,
corporation level and let them specify it too.
or even elementary and middle school levels, especially if we want to look at the incentive points, because high schools now have
Me neither.
A's to dual
Okay, can
credits,
we
all those ways to
reconvene
earn
as a
bonus
single
points.
group,
Elementary, middle
please?
schools have none of those.
Right.
Like, there's
So I think
no.
Maybe the answer is no, I don't know.
There's no way
Best
to
and brightest.
earn a bonus point in elementary.
Can't hear me.
school, as opposed to the
Highly
high school has
effective,
several other
integrated
options to
education
increase your
is
score.
increased funding.
I see.
I mean,
They can all
actually,
hear me
say-
back there, and there's nobody back there. I don't know why I'm talking. People up here.
So if we increase recruitment of the best and brightest teaching profession, that covers licensing, accreditation.
Corporations will develop family literacy programs to increase parental involvement.
Highly effective, rated teachers and administrators. A highly effective teacher leads to higher funding for professional development.
Ownership too.
I think you can list what we want to measure by student reading level,
Ties
and
into,
could we tie it to I
Some
read
of my
3
best
somehow?
teachers, the highest test takers, they're the best innovators. They're highly critical thinkers,
yeah. Well,
but they're not test takers. So they struggle to get the licensing. You know, so when I look at a teacher, I look at all the qualities.
building leaders should do.
Yeah, you gotta weigh all that, because
is-
sometimes even the brightest
Is our question
Tough
how
writer.
basketball.
how it enhances the student or how it enhances the parent, though?
When he put
My thought would be the involvement with the parent. How does that
But we had talked
enhance?
earlier about
honors
getting
type
back on learning and away from testing.
so,
Oh, okay.
am I okay?
Okay.
I keep changing your of into,
That's okay. Right,
because I'm thinking about that hourly.
fine. I just was writing what you guys were saying and trying to get it. I think the three benefits we have is.
Go ahead.
Or through reading log. I mean,
Couple of things
have
are
them
clear. First of
assign
all, you're
them.
nowhere near
Going
finished.
through that process.
You didn't expect
Those are benefits that are most.
Quality of this work is going to depend on how much. Wrap up, what I'd like to ask is just each group to give a quick one-minute synopsis of the sort of things we're talking about so that well, let's start with.
No offense, but we're far right. It's all a matter of perspective. Oh, Bostonians. These all need refinement, so forgive us for not having it perfectly written, but world-class standards and assessment systems that measure performance, growth, and proficiency. That'll be ongoing, never-ending objective in a way, but there'll be a continual process of keeping great standards in place and our ability to measure growth and proficiency. Objective 2, 95, by the way, all these percentages need work. 95% of Indiana students will graduate with a non-waiver diploma. Number 3 objective, reading achievement will be top 10 in the nation, 3rd, 6th, 8th grade by 2018. Again, needs research. Objective 4, 25% of students graduate with a workforce certificate, AP pass, or dual credit course. 1/4 of all of our students. 90% of students pass the state assessments. Right now, that would be ISTEP and ECA by 2017. Both of them, you know, whatever we do. Objective number 6, STEM achievement, top 10 in the nation, 3rd, 6th, 8th grade by 2018. I don't know why we left high school out, but we could talk about that. Now, the last 5 objectives will all have a clause. We just didn't work it in yet. We call it caveat. We will disaggregate all data with no more than, I'll just make up a number, 10% disparity between socioeconomic, race, or geography. So in other words, when we measure all these things, if we find pockets of folks in rural Indiana are more than 10% off the standard we set, that will not, we will not met our goal on any of these objectives. So we don't want to meet an objective but leave whole big groups of people behind if we find that happening. So we'll have to work on the writing, but our objectives are then around STEM, reading, graduation with workforce certificate, or dual credit or AP. And then, of course, I talked about graduation rates. So well, the first one, if you don't have world-class standards and excellent assessment systems, it's hard to get to the rest. But I suppose a terminal, I mean, if 95% of our students graduated without a waiver and we have really good standards, we probably have something. Yeah, I mean, I don't, my group.
We worked on the stakeholder goal, and we didn't get so far as to write them as SMART objectives yet, but we took a lot of time defining what stakeholder groups were necessary to include within our objectives and some key areas of focus within that. The first one we listed was parental involvement. We talked about the benefit of some sort of survey that schools conduct, getting parental feedback on effectiveness and programming. We also talked about the benefit of including some element of a family literacy program within our corporations. The second group of stakeholders was looking at business involvement. We talked some about sponsorships and partnerships between local businesses and schools. Community involvement, again, looking at partnerships from active community groups. And finally, educational partnerships, so looking at shared resources between buildings, looking at higher ed relationships, dual credit options, things like that.
Well, we had the human capital goal, and we talked about, first of all, the tangible measures, and we thought that what is going to benefit, and we really feel like there will be more effective teachers and administrators. There will be higher student achievement. There will be more love of learning through this process. And then how would the benefits be measured? We just felt like we would be able to allow teachers more chance to be more innovative, et cetera. There were 4 areas that we were concerned about: professional development, recruitment into our profession, accreditation and licensing, and then also then the teacher evaluation piece, as we know that must be there. We didn't get to the SMART goals yet. We were still heavily in those discussions. Of course, ours kept sliding into strategies and other things, but the 3 things that we think that we need to really focus in on this goal was, 1, to increase the recruitment of the best and the brightest of the teaching profession each school year, and we could measure that. And we could increase the number of highly effective rated teachers and administrators from the evaluation process. And we could increase the funding for professional development if we feel that's an important part for us to have continuing growth in our development as teachers and educators. So I think those were the things that we started to talk about, and then we could probably be able to refine those into SMART goals. Yeah.
That first one of recruiting the best and the brightest, that may be starting, recruiting them from higher ed, recruiting them from careers. Right, in the first year program. Into a huge. And then that one.
We did discuss,
Then, and maybe it falls into the other categories, but I feel strongly, those first-year teachers really do need some support systems in place, and we've been on both sides of that pendulum, and we need to find a common ground in there for them, because they do need support.
Terry, we did discuss that as a group. We talked about the mentee-mentor program as it's being pushed away a little bit as being part of that professional development piece that may need some additional funding to get those people off to a great start so they can have a great career.
The idea is that at some level, the answer to that first question, what are the tangible benefits of following this goal? All 3 of these goals could probably answer increased student achievement, realistically. I mean, that's ultimately what you're driving at there, which suggests just a concept which I will throw out. Inevitably, student achievement data is something that's shared up front as the primary data. That's really the data that people want to see. And so it's possible that you could think in terms of a sort of a general dashboard view on education that has student achievement, that characterizes student achievement, that essentially talks to all 3 of these goals. And then underneath that, so that what I'm suggesting is that it may not be necessary for any of these goals to list increased student achievement as an objective, and you may not wind up doing that. But that may not be necessary, because inevitably there will be some sort of report each year about education in Indiana. And you could create, take a proactive approach to creating some sort of dashboard that you could use to share, and that would be a general overall strategy. So it's not necessary that any of you need to take increasing student achievement, but I think all of you are intending that as to be the ultimate piece that you're working on, okay? So we've sort of come to the end of the day. I want to let Harvey do some next steps. Obviously, we have to continue this. Please keep the communications open. We want to collect what you've done so far. In the future weeks, please send any emails, any thoughts you have, any input you want to give to us. Send them to Ann. She will give them to us, and we'll keep compiling all this work. Yes, sir.
All the materials that I've collected in my activities, and Chris, what we've got here, I can type up by the end of the week, get it to Ann. So probably within 3 days. Yeah. Right. And that. Right, you guys should have that. Right, I've got all the handouts.
I will.
I think I've got all the handouts except the ones you just did right here. So if I could capture those before you leave, don't run off each group, so I can just capture the ideas. But if you follow, I know you can't see all this in the corner, but let me tell you the next steps. We are going to take the feedback you have and make a second draft, or a second shot at putting the mission and vision, but next time we're not going to put out two. We're going to take the input we've gotten and try to say, this is our recommendation for how you should phrase your mission, recommendation for how you should phrase your vision, taking the input we have right now. Then you can come back, and if you want to wordsmith a little bit, fine. The goals, I think we've done basically the goals. I've got the goal statements that I'll send out that you all have developed, the 3 you're working on right now. Feel free if you want to do some modifications to that, but I think they're pretty good buckets. You've kind of come there. Now, the next thing is this. Obviously, there's a lot more work to be done on the objectives, because most of you all got objective concepts down, but not SMART goals. Is that pretty accurate? Or if you have SMART goals, you're not really sure they're the right ones because you have to collect baseline data, you have to collect other kind of instruments. We get that. There is going to be a planning session with the planning committee on February the 6th. We had hoped to, if we were able to actually complete all of the objectives to the SMART level today, go and start drilling down into the strategies and into leading, lagging indicators and data. What we're going to probably do at this point is just take all the input you have right now, and we'll send it out to you in a couple of days. Then when that committee comes together, what we want to do is to try to keep finishing, you've got to finish the objectives first. You've got to have SMART objectives. So we'll have that committee on the February 6th work until completion to make sure we have objectives that are SMART objectives, measurable, attainable, all that, results-oriented for these 3 areas. As soon as that project is done, if it's done by noon that day, we'll launch that afternoon into the next step, which is now we've got to come up with strategies for how we're going to get this done. You all had a hard time, as most groups do today. You really wanted to jump into the how before we define the what, and that's understandable. But you've got to define the what so that people know what strategies to create. So we're going to be getting a push on that. As soon as we do that, one thing we need to understand, and this slide up here is important, and I know you can't all see it, but this is the deal. The way it usually works is this. Once we've actually come down to the point where we have the objectives very clearly defined, we will put together goal teams who will then have the charge of trying to come up with things like collecting baseline data, determining whether that's the right kind of objective, because where's the baseline, coming up with strategies on how to get this done. In order to do that, we need content experts in these specific areas. There are going to be some people that start working on your human capital one that are going to have to be content experts in that area. So the way this will work, for each one of the goal areas, there will be a board sponsor and a DOE sponsor, executive leadership sponsor. So there'll be a board and a DOE sponsor who will be the lead. They'll take the lead on fleshing out the strategies and coming out with the data and the data sources and helping with the leading lagging indicators. We will be pulling in content experts from DOE as appropriate and pulling in content experts from other organizations as appropriate. And those will become the people who will do a lot of the down and dirty hard work of putting the detail in this, all of which will float back to you for your approval. Because some of this is going to be at the level of granularity that you all can't do. Does that make sense? I mean, it's just going to be very technical and very specific. So that's where it's going to go, but be thinking about how we're going to do the board span. Everybody on here, every one of these teams is going to have a board sponsor. And that's a person who's just passionate about making sure this thing gets done well, gets driven down, and kind of is a lead. And then the DOE will also have one. So kind of think about that. Yes, sir. Comment.
Just two things.
Good.
But how does one take?
Yeah. And
The board, frankly, in the past,
well, you're exactly right. Once, you've heard Chris talk about it this morning. Remember, he kept talking about the project management, PMOC, project management component and all that. When you look at developing a strategic plan, the next step beyond developing the plan is looking about making it actionable and making it accountable. Well, making it actionable requires resources in many cases. And making it accountable is people are assigned to those action steps, and then there's reports that come back from that. A lot of redirecting. So in many cases, it's how can we use existing resources in a different way? How can we budget allocations? Like you guys even talked about that over here when you were looking at the human capital. There might be a need to incentivize certain behaviors or whatever. So that all comes as we go from strategic planning into balanced scorecard and being able to do the monitoring process and accountability. Now, there is one thing, Chris, say a word.
Yeah, let me just piggyback on that a little bit. The main difference between objectives and strategies, and I haven't really done this, I may have done this teaching a little bit with you guys at the last session, but one of the easiest ways that I use to tell the difference between a what and a how, and this is directly relating to what you said, is that you can pretty much guess what a how is going to cost you. It's impossible really to know what a what is going to cost you. All right, and so if you think about an objective of we want to increase graduation rate, well, what's it going to cost to increase graduation rate 10% over the next 2 years? Who knows? I mean, who could guess within $100 million? Who knows? But when you get down to the strategy level, the way you're going to do that is by credit recovery programs, by this, by that. And most people, when you say, I'm going to put in a credit recovery program at every high school in the state, you can get out a piece of paper and figure out what that's going to cost. So really, when you get to that strategy level, is when the resource piece really kicks in. Right now, how you're going to redirect resources between goals and objectives isn't clear. But when the strategies hit, you're going to see what you're signing up to pay for, and then you're going to be able to align it to what you really are paying for. So I think that's the level when the resources really will kick in. Does that make sense, Dan?
Then another piece that you all have asked us to do is you've said we don't want to create this strategic plan in a vacuum. We want to get input from some stakeholders who are already at the table, who are going to be implementing this and whatever. And so we've been working with staff to come up with a process that even though the product isn't going to be done, you can get them in early in the process so they don't feel like there was a fait accompli, and we did the whole thing and then we're going to give it to you and tell you what we've done. So mid-process, we've put in a stakeholder convening of sorts to get some feedback that you all could then use relative to this. But we wanted to have enough structure so that they had some idea of where you're going. So, Ann, come on, want to explain our convening. This is a strategy. We're asking to see if you see this as viable strategy for the convening for input.
So this is something that we had a planning call on Monday with SELT, and we talked about a proposed idea for engaging with different constituent groups. And we've also shared the draft constituent group list with all of you via the weekly update that went out last week, and then also the materials that went out this week, just as a refresher. And so this is kind of our proposed idea to work on this is, first of all, we're talking about having a session in February. So for example, you have the regular board meeting is on the 5th, the planning committee meets on the 6th, and then SELT would work with the constituent groups on the 7th. That would not have to be something that board members would have to be a part of. That would be something that SELT, the consultant, would facilitate on behalf of the group. We talked with them about some key questions that they could address, which are here on this sheet, as well as looking at what types of sessions to have to facilitate those key questions. And so we talked about having 2 separate 2-hour sessions with different constituent groups. And when we looked at the draft constituent groups, I mean, some of them are school-based groups, for example, Superintendent's Association, Principals Association, ISTA, PTA, iCase, just various school-based groups or school-related groups. And then there's also what I would call community groups. So, 100 Black Men, La Plaza, those types of groups. So we're getting a lot of diversity, we're getting a lot of input, we're getting school, we're getting community, we're getting really all constituents who obviously are going to want to have a voice, and we want to hear their voice in terms of the process. And so then SELT will facilitate that to get the input from those groups. We will also facilitate, board staff will facilitate that with SELT, and obviously we would invite DOE staff to collaborate with us on that as well. We invited the constituent groups. You can see the different groups there that are invited to participate. We will be asking each group to send 2-3 representatives so that they come and have a voice on behalf of their organization is who they're speaking on behalf of. So it's not their individual voice, but it's their voice as an entity. And that would be the first part of the feedback. The second part of the feedback would be linking with the Career Council and the Education Roundtable, because we obviously want to get their input as well. The Career Council already has a meeting confirmed for February 12th, so we as board staff would help to facilitate that, getting their input, as well as then the Education Roundtable. They have a meeting scheduled, I believe, February 20th, but we think that'd be too late to get their input. We'd want to get their input sooner. So the week of February 10th, that's why it says February 10th, that's not a hard date, but sometime during that week, we'd like to see if there's some way to get input from the Education Roundtable. And we think it's important because with the proposed approach with the Career Council, Superintendent Ritz also sits on that council, so we can have her input there. And then also the Career Council is chaired by the governor, so that I've heard from folks today about making sure that everything links together and ties together for state resources. And then also with the Education Roundtable, it is co-chaired by the governor as well as Superintendent Ritz. So I think that makes sure that everything is looping back and connecting. And then part 3, communicating with legislators. Upon a final adoption of the plan, we would want, Dan is the chair of the committee working on the strategic plan, and also Superintendent Ritz. We would want her and board staff also to meet with leadership, as well as the House and Senate Education Committees, so that we're making sure that all of the legislators and key folks are involved in this process, just in terms of making it really broad and making sure that everyone who has, a voice has a voice, and that we're involving everyone. So this is our draft proposal. Kind of as Chris and Harvey have said, if you have thoughts or ideas related to this, if you want to provide me your feedback, I'll make sure to share that with them as well, so that we're making sure we have a very thorough process, very robust, and we're involving lots of constituents and stakeholders in the process, so that it is, we're not overlooking anything. So I think that's one thing that's been very clear in hearing the dialogue today with everyone, is that we want to make sure that everything is covered. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, but just wanted to, I know that was very quick, but just wanted to provide just a synopsis, and so you have that, and we welcome any input you have. So.
Just to clarify, on the days we have these meetings, what we intend to take to them as a product will be your mission statement, your vision statement, your goals, and your objectives. We'll have a whole workday on the 6th, and hopefully we'll have these objectives in SMART format. We are not going to take to these groups strategies, leading, lagging indicators, all that technical how we're going to do the business, because this is not, We don't want their input on how to do the business, you know, the strategies. I want their input on whether we're digging in the right holes, whether we've set the right things, set right measures and all that. So it's at that level they'll be providing input. So anyway. Always. Well, that's kind of why I used to have brown hair. You moderate that because reality is that you have to balance what is best practice. Dan, you said to us a couple times, part of this is informed by best practice. So one of the things when you get to strategies, you want to know, well, if you're going to increase, you know, productivity and human capital, are there some best practices that research says out there? So part of what we'll be bringing to the table, once you get to that level, once you do the action pieces, we'll be bringing back to each of the work groups, hey, here's some best practices. These are things that have worked very well in these conditions or whatever, so that you've got some research base for what you're doing, you're just not grabbing. And then the other thing is what's doable, what's fundable, how much it's going to cost. I mean, all those factors go into it, but we try to make it as much research-based as you can. And then the reality is it just comes down to some things that you want to do. I mean, you choose to do it. You could do it this way, A, B, or C, and you choose to do it this way. And that's where you can get into some debate and things like that. But the more granular this gets, the more granular, also the more you're beginning to step on other people's toes in the way they do their business, you know. So when we start talking about this is how we want to see human capital developed and move forward, you're going to have some things that might change an HR director's life out in the field out there, you know. And so that's when you start to get people not only more interested, but more exercised in the process, because you've quit preaching and you started meddling, you know. So that's where it does get that way, but if you don't go there, you won't have an actionable plan. You won't have anything that you all can make changes. Ultimately, we are trying to create change for the better for kids, to raise student achievement. And that means you have to create change, and that sometimes is uncomfortable for some people, but that's where we're headed eventually. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's pretty much it.
Now I know why. But it's really been fun to be with you. Qualities of the board. All the credit ways to create an environment. Thanks to everybody.
I need what you've written for level 3 for the objectives before you leave.
You too. Have a safe drive.